Welcome to the Member Engagement Show, the podcast for association and member-based organization professionals. I'm your host, Kelly Whalen from Higher Logic. If you're looking to grow membership, boost retention, increase non-dues revenue, and get members more engaged, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the show to keep up with the latest episodes and visit higherlogic.com/engagement show to access past episodes and resources. Now, let's meet today's guest. On this episode of the Member Engagement Show, I'm joined by Ashleigh Brookshaw, one of Higher Logic's strategic advisors. As organizations work through different stages of AI adoption at their organization, Ashleigh brings a great perspective. She's both a Prosci-certified change manager and an agile and traditional project manager, which means she spends a lot of time thinking not just about what AI can do, but how organizations actually adopt it successfully. So I'm excited to dig in with Ashleigh and explore factors like organizational culture, data quality, and governance. Welcome to the show, Ashleigh.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. And I was wondering, as I said it out loud, I don't think I've ever said Prosci certification out loud. Is that what it's called?
That is what it is called. Yeah, like Prosci is the organization that certifies for change management.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would share with listeners about yourself or your background?
Yeah, just really quickly. So like, as you said, I am a Prosci certified change manager, and I've also done a lot of project management, both traditional and agile. And I've been working in the community space for about 10 years. So everything that I share with customers and clients really is a multidisciplinary approach. So just wanted to make sure that the listeners knew, like, I'm not just like the project manager, the change manager. I really am a community professional. I just leverage a multidisciplinary approach.
Oh, and I love that. I feel like when we've chatted before, that always comes through. Your background is very multifaceted, and your work is very multifaceted.
Yes, you have to be these days, especially when we're going to be discussing about AI. So absolutely.
Well, diving right in, I think the most visible part of the AI transformation we're experiencing is kind of the tools and features. And that's why I was excited to have you on the show, because I wondered, from your perspective, why should associations think about AI first as a change management challenge, not just about tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'd like to do is really answer this perspective in two parts, right, from both the member and the internal staff. Associations in general are really built and focused on the member experience. I have worked at associations before. I've worked on the membership team. So I really do have a good understanding of how membership and associations really are like the lifeblood. So when we're talking about change at the association level in general, I know how hard firsthand it can be for members. One of my key learnings from Prosci, like when I was doing the change management, is really getting that understanding that change happens at the individual level, and organizations really cannot change unless the people change. I know that associations go through a lot of different changes, whether it be, launching a new AMS, having a new governance structure. I've worked on all of that. So when we're talking about AI adoption specifically, because it is so rapidly evolving and changing, I always caution associations to think through, like, this could be painful for your members. And that's why it's important to think about it as a cultural and mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can't really be successful if your team isn't bought in, if your staff doesn't know like how they should approach it or what they need to do. Then you could say all day, every day that you want to digitally transform, and it's not going to happen if the people aren't part of it. The same as what you said, like you could implement a new LMS, you could implement a new AMS, you could implement a community, even like Higher Logic's bread and butter. And if you don't have people bought in and they don't understand how they can leverage that new thing, then they're not going to leverage it to the best of its ability.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think one of the most intentional exercises that associations can do, like while we're talking about change at the high level, is take a moment and just get an understanding of, like, what is the landscape of your organization? What is the current member sentiment? What are you hearing? And not only that, if you're in a specific industry, what is the industry's perspective on AI as general? I think that those are great foundational steps to even think through before you start taking a look at, changing the members and changing the infrastructures as well, specifically with AI.
Yeah, that's a really great call out because I could imagine that different organizations are going to need to approach AI differently, not just based on like their capacity internally, but also based on their audience. Like there's going to be associations where the members are hungry for AI, they have no problem with it, and I think there are going to be associations where you're serving a population that has real concerns about AI, and you can't ignore that and just kind of be like, yeah, we're so excited about AI. Like, and that's not to say you wouldn't use it at all, but you want to be aware of that going into it so that you can address it in a way that resonates with your membership.
Yeah, Kelly, you're absolutely right. And this actually causes me to think of something that just happened in the news, like with a school, for example, where they use like AI to like read the teleprompters, like the students' names. And a
Yeah.
lot of students got missed. So, kind of when you're thinking about I think it's important for not only associations, but organizations to get an understanding of like, is AI a good fit for this particular thing that we're doing? And what is the long term impact to members? And in this case, it was to the students. Like that was something that they're going to remember, that they didn't get their name called or didn't go up on the screen or what have you because they used AI in the graduation ceremony.
I think that's a great call out that will lead really nicely into our next question. And I want to comment on it for a minute just to say like that is one of the key areas where you as an organization, you might be committed to adding AI to your processes, but you get to choose where. You
Absolutely.
get to choose like what are the places that we want to apply it and what are the places where maybe we don't want to apply it because we have this concern or we just don't. I mean, for me, a lot of times it comes down to, well, I think AI is better at this type of task and I don't think it's that good at this other type of task yet. So I'm going to apply it here instead of here. And so that was one of my questions was, what are some of the key components of that preparation process and AI readiness that associations and nonprofit organizations might want to think about?
So, with any change, I think it's really important to understand what is the concrete or the perceived impact for your members. And having that foundation is really going to help you walk the members, the users, or in some cases, internal staff down that unique path. So for me, preparation really starts with just for the first and foremost, acknowledging that AI is a new way of working. It's constantly evolving. It seems like there's always some sort of like new tool or new way to approach it. But I think the first step is just understanding that it's here to stay. Like I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, but like acknowledging that it is here to stay and then kind of really being intentional and thinking through how can this help us? So what does that look like? AI provides a really great and unique way to collaborate and crowdsource, but it's going to look different at every organization. And that's the first thing I really want to call out.
And I think that's important because it reminds me how we internally at Higher Logic, some of the work that we've been doing, at least on my team in marketing, has been around, and it might seem very basic to some folks, but literally outlining what our processes are now, maybe including AI and maybe not including AI yet, and just saying, this is what it takes, using this podcast as an example. What are the steps it takes to go from an idea of an episode to inviting someone to having them join and record? And then once it's recorded, how do we edit it? How do we upload it? What are those steps? And outlining it so we can see, is there a spot in this process that AI could help? And if it was going to help, what would it need to know? And if it was going to help, are there systems it needs to be connected to? And then, I mean, maybe even before all of those questions, asking yourself, is this something I want it to help with? Or is this something where I really feel like it needs fully the human touch? I think about that a lot with some organizations might choose to review resumes with AI because it makes things faster. I personally don't like to do that if I'm hiring because I want to see the actual resumes. I don't want to see the summary of what the resumes say. I understand that takes me longer, but for me, that component is somewhere that I don't need it to be faster. I want it to be, maybe I just have a control itch. Like maybe I just struggle to give up control. But that particular task is something where I think the risks of using it outweigh the benefits. And then there are other spots where I'm like, no, 100%. Like the benefits are outweigh the risks. And you want to know what the risks are going in. Like no one should kind of just pull the wool over their eyes about it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, Kelly, that was beautifully stated. And a lot of the things that I spent a lot of time thinking about, from I had mentioned earlier, the kind of multidisciplinary approach, like I really take a look at AI as like, you call it like requirements gathering from like a project management perspective, right? What are the things that like we're currently doing and what are the requirements to continue to make things like successful, right? I remember when I was in class, when I was getting my certification for project management, that the teacher had us do something very simple about, tell me how to make like a peanut butter sandwich, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds very, very easy to tell someone how to make a peanut butter sandwich until you really get into the details, right? What kind of peanut butter are we using? Is it crunchy? Is it smooth? How are we going to cut it? Is it going to be presented diagonal or is it going to be in a triangle? So like really once you start getting into like, here's the concept, and then we get into the really small details, it really does take a lot of like intentional thought, and AI is no different. A lot of people are going like, hey, I want to use AI for this, but really are they taking a moment back to step back and be like, does AI belong in this moment? Like, how can this help and or hurt what I'm trying to do? Because there's inherent risk in everything.
Yeah, I love that example because it reminded me how you also want to think about what you want AI to know, because
Yes.
that the example of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I think we did that in I want to say it was in one of my like some writing class I took. I don't know why we were doing that
Yeah.
exercise, but
I love it.
the instructor asked for us to give them instructions for making the sandwich. And if you didn't tell him to open the bag for the bread, he just started putting peanut butter on the bag
Yes.
to show us that those steps matter too. And I think that is one of the things I actually like about the AI implementation process is that it doesn't just require that you be like technically advanced. Sometimes it
Yes.
requires that you just be really thoughtful about how something works and what the actual steps are from a point A to point B, and have that documented and have like your thinking or your background information documented so that when you set up an AI process, it has that information to pull from. It's basically like training someone who doesn't know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and giving it all your preferences too, saying like get the wheat bread instead of the white bread, like
Yes.
telling it all of
100%.
that background.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and like we talk about, like it seems like so simple, but like let's take a look at an organizational structure for an association, for example. Like if you're really serious about like implementing like AI, I think it's really important to just get an understanding of like what is your organizational landscape. So for example, from a data perspective, what data do we have? What data are we using? When is the last time that the data was cleaned up? Right. So getting an understanding of just what your organizational and technological infrastructure, I think is really important, because if you're trying to implement AI from a member perspective, you need to understand what you already have and then be able to kind of speak that language, Kelly, like you're talking about, to be like, here's what we're using the data for. Here's what what we're planning to do with it. Like you have to be able to communicate succinctly and clearly on why AI is important, what that means for them as the member, specifically the member data, and then, kind of generate awareness and excitement around that new path, if that's something that you guys are trying to do.
I love that you naturally like ran right into the data conversation, because that was literally my next question.
I love
Like I
it.
think one thing organizations don't always think about as much is how much the quality of your AI outputs is going to rely on the quality of the data inputs that you give it. So I think there's some pre-work that associations find themselves, or any organization finds themselves doing. I know we are doing it at Higher Logic. Like I'm going through being like, oh, if I want AI to help me draft a blog post, like what are my good blog posts? How do I tell it like these are the good ones? Look at these ones. Don't look at these ones. I wonder if you have anything that you would call out in regards to things that associations want to evaluate from a data perspective or otherwise before implementing or when implementing AI tools.
Yeah. And first thing I want to say is like, I know that like data projects, data cleanliness, like is a big undertaking for associations, depending on staffing and resourcing and, where you are like in your event cycle. So I certainly want to make sure that I acknowledge that. But I will say that data cleanliness is probably one of the most highly rated like work streams like in associations, because we know that association data can live in a variety of places, and depending on your organizational and like technological infrastructure and ecosystem, all of those data sources may not talk to each other. So I think the first is just doing like a data audit of, like I said, what data do we have and like where does it live? So if you aren't doing data audits as part of your organizational and strategic planning and maintenance, I definitely recommend starting there and then getting an understanding of like, if you were tracking data previously that wasn't relevant or was relevant, making that determination and getting that understanding. Because to your point, Kelly, whatever you use AI for, it's only going to be as good as the data that is currently being put into it. So I think that that's really important to start with.
Absolutely. And I think associations, one of their biggest strengths is also one of their biggest challenges. Like a lot of them have been around for a long time. They have a lot of stuff, like a lot of data, a lot of documents, a lot of background information. And I'm not saying like, oh, go in and delete all the old stuff. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think knowing and having an organizational structure for what you have and knowing where it is and knowing which stuff is the stuff that you trust now and where that needs to come from, and also knowing which of our systems do talk to each other, which of them don't, and do we want to fix that before we add AI on top of it? Like I could, it's like I had a problem with my jaw earlier this week, and I promise this is like somewhat relevant. And I remember my dentist was like, maybe you don't want to fix this problem before you fix your wisdom tooth problem. Because if you fix this problem first, your wisdom teeth are going to change and then you're going to have a problem with the thing we just fixed. It's not going to be fixed. So in that regard, I feel like it's a little bit of like, do you have the foundation? Is there any work you want to do on the foundation before you start building the second story? Like,
Yes. And this, I know we're going to talk about this hopefully a little bit later as well, but like this really gets into just organizational structure from a governance perspective. So when we're talking about internally, this is a great opportunity to have like the necessity for collaboration, cross departmental collaboration. I have, like I said, implemented a community in various organizations, both associations and corporate. And one of the things that have been led to the most success, like for me, in terms of like mind shift and cultural ways of working, is really having that foundational cross-departmental collaboration. So when we're talking about data, and it might live in different places, right? So membership data can live in one system, marketing data can live in another system, professional development data may live somewhere else. This is an excellent opportunity for you at the association level to get a core team together, a representative from every separate department, and just kind of start having that conversation on like, what kind of data are you guys tracking? What do you plan to do with it? Do you have you guys been tracking this type of data, to really kind of start that conversation? Because again, the data cleanliness is really going to directly impact how the AI functions in your specific organization and use case.
I mean, it goes back to both the adoption for sure. Just
Yes.
the more when people are involved, they're going to feel a little more ownership, a little more investment. But like you said, it's also that the functional part of it, of having different people involved. It reminds me how with certain AI projects we've approached on my team, if someone builds something for me, like as a content marketer, if someone who's not a content marketer builds something for me without talking to me, then we might not get an AI tool that I feel confident using, because I don't know what it's pulling from and I don't know what it was built off of. And it doesn't have some of the expertise that I would have infused it with. And that reminds me how it's so important, if you are doing something where it's going to touch multiple areas, that you've got those stakeholders in the room, both so that they are invested in it. They're not just like, hey, this thing's being applied to me. Because I feel like change management hits so many different areas, and one of them is just like getting buy-in, getting people to like do the thing.
Yes.
But there's also the, hey, did we build a thing that people want to use? Did we build a thing that is really going to help the most amount of people and actually does the thing they want it to do, instead of doing the thing we thought it should do?
Yeah. And you know what, Kelly, I love that you brought that up, because I think that this is an opportunity for us to at least kind of tease out a little bit when we're talking about AI adoption. From the association level, it really could be in two separate personas or two separate target audiences, right? There is the AI adoption for like your members or your consumers, your users of whatever technology that you're working with. But there's also the internal AI adoption of like your staff, right? So the ways of working and getting an understanding what that could look like. So I think to your point, like it's really important to get an understanding just either from, member surveys, if it's from an external perspective. It could be from employee engagement surveys from an internal perspective. Maybe you add a couple questions on like, how are you using AI, or like, are you interested in it? Just to kind of get like that pulse line, because from an organizational perspective, at least it is my opinion that AI will look different at every organization, also depending on like your organization's maturity, as well as like just where they are from like a cultural perspective, right? Like if your association is really risk averse, especially from like a member perspective, they may be slower to adopt AI, or it may take a little bit more time and intentionality to put that plan together. Same thing from the internal perspective. In change management, we really call this highlighting the what's in it for them, or the with them. And I think that that's really important and foundational, because that will set the stage for how are you approaching communications? How are you approaching messaging? How are you approaching training and development? So there's a lot of different foundational plans that will pull from this basic data and kind of approach that we're discussing right now.
Yeah, and that leads me into a question that I wanted to ask you, which was kind of like you said, there are so many different ways and so many different projects that you could apply AI. And I think maybe a barrier for some folks is because there are so many ways that you could do it, so many options, so many things you could use AI for. How do you decide what to work on? And one of the most helpful notes that I heard at a conference last year was starting with actually outlining like what all the jobs to be done are, and then flagging which ones you want to start with or which ones you think AI is going to apply best to. And then, like we were talking about much earlier in the episode, breaking that down into what the tasks actually are that make up those jobs to be done. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how to approach that, how to decide where you start or what you're going to work
Yeah.
on.
So at the association level, I know that there is board retreats, there's leadership engagements, and I know that association kind of strategic planning usually comes out of these like regular engagements, like with the leadership. So I believe that AI really should be part of your current strategic planning cadence, right? So if you're meeting with your board once a quarter, once every 6 months, or like annually, making sure that that is a standing agenda item and having ad hoc meetings on that as necessary. I think that this is a great opportunity for AI to really be embedded in the culture of the organization. I think that that's the first part. The second part is that Prosci has a really great framework for organizational integration. And it's kind of exactly what you talked about, Kelly, about like getting an understanding of like where AI fits into like human centered work and where it can collaborate to make things better. So for me, I always really push clients and organizations to kind of think through, to your point, making an audit to be like, what do we currently do that AI could potentially help with? What doesn't need to be necessarily like human led, but AI supported? I think that that's a great place to start.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about involving the board too, because I think
Yes.
that's where that's where you have to have conversations about what investments are going to be made, whether those are financial or time based.
Yes.
Because again, there's probably a lot you can do that's not as financially based, but it reminds me how even implementing something like marketing automation, I remember practically begging our leadership to give me like a week of just not sending, or 2 weeks of not sending promotional emails, so that we could get our member onboarding campaign set up, because it kept being impossible to do both, to like do the regular run of business and the and set up this new thing and test it and quality test it and make sure it was working the way we wanted it to. And so I needed leadership to invest the time of saying, yes, you can take a break from the day-to-day things you do so that you can get this thing set up, because once it's set up, it's going to make such a difference for you. And I feel like for some organizations, they still don't have the buy-in to do the marketing automation.
Right. Or the community.
Like, they're still,
point. Yeah.
right, or community or whatever. So like there's definitely an aspect here of making sure that leadership is bought in. I mean, I know that's why our CEO, Rob Wanger, he chats with leadership at other organizations all the time, so that they understand the weight of this moment in time and how they might approach it. But it just reminds me that that's such an important component of this, really incorporating leadership and how much you incorporate them will depend on your organization. Like I get that some organizations, you don't necessarily want the board to dictate how you're going to use it. You just want their buy-in that you are going to use it and that you need a little space to do that.
You're absolutely right. And I think, like, again, as we're talking about AI as a cultural shift, with new ways of working and new ways of like interacting, it's going to look different like at every organization. So I think that what's most important, like we talked about, is making sure that AI is part of like your strategic planning cadence that you're already having. If there needs to be a creation, this might be a great opportunity to create like a new committee or a new kind of like task force or working group that has interested parties, either from a member perspective, volunteer, leveraging your most engaged members to be a part of perhaps a new kind of like task force where you get an understanding of like, what does AI really mean for like our organization? Like how can, like what tools are out there? How are people using it? What is its impact on our industry? I think that some of the things about, kind of creating like buy-in is really having as much data or, sentiment that you can to support it. Like, this is what our members want. This is kind of like what we're hearing. The same thing would apply from an internal staff perspective. Here's what our employees are using from an AI perspective. Here's what they want to see. How can we walk down this path of change and journey together?
One of the things that came to me as you were describing that too was the importance of kind of the staff enablement component. I didn't necessarily want to lead us too far down that road because I think that could be a whole conversation, but like, don't underestimate too that if you tell staff, oh, use AI. Again, we've talked about a couple times on this episode, there are so many ways you could use it. So it's important to understand you might have to do a little bit of enablement or point people to resources, or at least create spaces where they can come together and share resources. Because there's going to be people, just like anything, there's going to be people for whom certain components of this shift in the way we work feels more natural and certain components don't. And so making sure people have spaces where they can share. Like I'm trying to learn how to build skills in ChatGPT, and I sat down and chatted with a colleague of mine who's already built a couple, because I was like, I could spend however much time trying to figure this out on my own, but I know you already figured it out. Can you just show me what you built so that I can start to really picture? Because I'm a very my learning style tends to be very like, if I can see it done, like I'm a big proponent of YouTube University, like watching videos of people doing stuff. So I think sometimes if you really want your staff to be successful, there's this component of making sure that they have that you're guiding them and how they might learn about it.
Yes. And, Kelly, that also brings up a point that I want to make sure that I speak to. Like, I would be remiss if I didn't say and acknowledge that I understand and we understand that association staff, you're already strapped for time. You're pressed. There's a lot of different things that is on your plate at any given amount of time. So I want to make sure that like we are acknowledging that. However, at the same time, if AI is really something that your organization is interested in doing and implementing, it is going to take a little bit of time. So I would also recommend, from an organizational perspective, again, just getting that that understanding and like that sentiment of like, where are people currently strapped? What time do they have? And there's nothing wrong with starting with a pilot, right? So we talked a lot about external adoption of AI and internal adoption of AI. There's nothing that says, there's no hard and fast rule that says you have to do both at the same time. I certainly don't want, I want to ease any sort of anxiety that may be hearing that if you're one of those association professionals where it's like, man, Ashleigh, like, I don't have time to do like any of this. And now you want me to do something else. I do just want to say, like, again, you can start small. It can start as a pilot. So I just wanted to make sure that that was out there, because I certainly remember working at an association, and I remember being very busy, very strapped for time all of the time.
Yeah, I was just going to say hard relate.
Yes.
At an association or not, like, there's always 100 things to do, and only, 40 hours plus, if you do work outside of your 40 hours a week to do the things. So, very much relate. And I think it's kind of a process of implementing what you can when you can, and trying to maybe grab those little moments of time saved that you can then apply somewhere else. I know Rob talks about it sometimes, and it's one of the things about AI that resonates with me the most. It's not about trying to take out the human to human interaction. It's not about that at all. It's literally, he's had some pushback sometimes where someone says, well, we don't want the AI to answer questions for our members because we want to talk to our members. And he reminds them, well, I'm not telling you not to talk to your members. I'm telling you, let AI answer the easy questions. The like, oh, what are your hours? What are your, like, where can I find the knowledge center? Those kind of simple questions that your staff doesn't have to spend time answering, so that they have time to answer the deeper questions where someone says, well, what could be the next step in my career? That kind of like deeper things.
Yes.
You free up time for those deeper things. And like you said, it's a process though, because you've mentioned like AI adoption requires people to learn entirely new ways of working. So I think there's skills and mindset shifts that association professionals need to have. And I wonder if there's any that you would call out of those mindset shifts or skills that people need the most.
I mean, as community professionals, I think that one of the main skill sets is just like that emotional intelligence, like getting that understanding. I think that that's going to be key. When I think about what a mindset would be like for AI, I always think about it from how can I have a curious and contextualized mindset? That's the definition I've been playing with in my own mind, because as we talked about, AI, it's not going anywhere. So I think that being curious about it as much as you're able to, but also contextualizing it in your specific organization, in your specific industry, and being intentional about it, I think is really important. I think that understanding that you can be committed to the journey and not necessarily quote unquote the full end result, because with AI, it evolves so rapidly. Like, we don't know what the end result could be. There is no kind of like defined end. So really being flexible from that perspective would be like my key pieces to answer your question.
I also really appreciate that you called out we don't know the end result, because I feel like I just figured out, or I just got comfortable. I had figured it out, but I just started feeling more comfortable building custom GPTs, and now I have to build skills.
Yes.
And part of me was like, oh my God, I just started feeling like, oh, I know when to turn to these things, and now there's a new thing. So it's definitely a process of continuous learning for sure. I also really like the way you positioned it, made me think about how there's this pushback around the concept of like getting left behind by AI. I work on social media. So both in a professional sense, I work on social media, and then as a person, I consume social media. So one might call me chronically online. And I keep seeing sort of the funny little memes about, oh, this is what it would look like if I get left behind by AI. And I'm very mindful that messaging often resonates with me too, because I'm like, oh, well, if it's going to leave me behind, then just let it. But I think for me, it's more about that curiosity, like you said, that curiosity of how can this thing be helpful? And then how do I be part of choosing how I want to use it, and what the ways that I want it to use it, and when I think it needs to know certain things to be able to do this thing in a way that I really want to feel comfortable with it. Because I think for people who have become maybe disillusioned with the way that it does things, or feeling like, oh, what it gave me wasn't good enough, I think the key difference is recognizing, well, how do I want to set it up so that what it gives me is what I want back? That was a big mindset shift for me. Like, I'm never going to end up using like ChatGPT, for example, out of the box without giving it some context. Every time I use it, I'm giving it like, oh, here's a couple, like, I don't know, again, if I use it to take a transcript from a podcast, for example, and make a blog post so that people can both consume it as audio, if that's how they like to consume it, or consume it written, which for me, I love that use case, because I'm like, well, that was something that maybe before I didn't have time for it. And I didn't like that I didn't have time for it, because it becomes like a little bit of a personal preference, or even an accessibility thing. Like, if someone doesn't want to listen, they should be able to read it. If someone doesn't want to read it, they should be able to listen. And now I have the power to be able to say, I can do both without running out of time, but I need it to never misquote the guest. Like, that was one thing in particular that I was like, okay, pull quotes, real quotes first, and then make sure that you're not misquoting the guest, or make sure that it understands the audience that we're talking to, and all of those things. So I think for me, that was a big mindset shift of, oh, I don't have to just use this the way it comes out of the box. I don't have to just use ChatGPT and take back whatever it gives me and think that's it, that's the best it's going to do. There are ways to give it the context I want it to have so that it gives me back things that I want.
Yeah. No, I agree. And for anyone that's also like listening, I also want to state that it is okay also to not be like what I would call like the technical builder as it relates to like AI, because to your point, Kelly, you're kind of looking at things like, how can I leverage this? Like, how can I do this? But it does take that back and forth, like with the system and kind of like the building it. And I think that that's great. There are also ways, like, I think that's really great for associations or people just to kind of think with us, like, okay, here's an inventory of all of the things that like I do. Here is where I think could be helpful. So for example, and I'm just spitballing here, let's say that you're doing a professional development conference, right? And you're taking a look at like, what programming like do I want to use? I think it's perfectly acceptable to kind of think of AI as like that digital support. I don't want to use the term like technical assistant, like it's not an agent, right? But just something that's helpful for you to collaborate. Like you could ask the AI, what's the best way to like split up like this program? What's the best way to kind of like do these sessions? And then you kind of work with it and workshop with that in the real time before you get the deliverable, that you want. I think that is a good example, kind of similar to what you're talking about, Kelly, as well.
I sometimes ask it, one of the ways that I will work with AI is to ask it to pressure test something. Like I have a lot of years of experience, so I don't necessarily, and I respect people who similarly are worried about like, well, I don't want the AI to like think for me. I want to still like come up with ideas. And sometimes for me, it's, yeah, I come up with the ideas and then I pressure test, or I say, am I missing anything that someone wouldn't follow? Am I missing something that this persona cares about? Because I've seen some really cool stuff that people have done where like one of my colleagues built some, calling them digital twins. I think others call it that as well, where it's built off of data that we have around certain types of people that we work with so that we can see like, does this make sense to this type of person?
I absolutely agree with you 100%. When you're thinking about AI from like a content perspective or like just taking a look at your operations, kind of streamlining that thing, there's different ways to use it. Like Kelly, like what you were saying, like you can pressure test it or you can just use it to kind of get you started. I think that when you're thinking about AI, like in general, because there's so many different ways to kind of like leverage it, you really do have the power to kind of think through and be like, this is what works best for me. And also from a collaboration standpoint, here's what I think could help me work with our volunteers better, like with staff better. It really is a tool. And I certainly understand the anxiety around like, I'm going to get left behind or things are going to like take over. I mean, I will be perfectly honest with you. Like, as I'm kind of taking a look at AI from like that change management perspective, walking people down like the path of adoption, like human anxiety, like it's a real thing. I mean, I don't know if anybody, back in, I'm probably going to date myself a little bit, like, watching like the Terminator, like, AI is now like, oh, self-aware, right? Like, what does that mean? But I think it's really important to build in like those human-centered, like, feedback loops and making sure that we're doing it ethically and responsibly. Because like I said, it is here to stay. It is a tool, but how we leverage the tool, I think is up to you and up to us.
Yeah, I'm glad that you acknowledged the anxiety because it reminded me how I think last week or maybe the week before I read an article about, I think it was Anthropic's, one of their new models, Mythos, got out of the sandbox area because it
Okay.
maybe quote unquote wanted to. And I was like, okay, I have to put that away. And I don't want to think about that. I don't like that at all.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I even want to say too, like, if you're concerned about using like AI in your organization or like what it could look like, maybe try using like AI from a personal perspective. Like I will say, this is probably really funny, but like I use AI, like even for meal planning, write me a grocery list if I'm making like this like recipe. I mean, there's so many smaller like test cases that you can use if you're super anxious and like you're uncomfortable. I think the best way to kind of mitigate that anxiety or just kind of work through it is try it in like low pressure instances, right? Like I said, like I use it like for meal planning. I also use it for like, how am I going to structure like my workouts, like, like this week, just smaller pieces. And then, kind of think through at your broader organizational perspective, what would that look like? But I think the hardest thing sometimes for people is just to get started, because we know that change, any type of change, especially, from Prosci research, it registers as pain in the brain, right? So we certainly don't want to put like our members or our colleagues or staff through like pain per se, but like, I think again, the best part is just to kind of get started, some low pressure things that, you can start with to see how does this work? Perhaps this isn't so bad. And then kind of like walk down that path at your organization as best you can.
Yeah, I think there's a component of it too. I was reminded of while you were talking about how if you learn how to do that, like just like we're talking about on this podcast, so that maybe listeners will get an idea. You at your organization in supporting your association by you figuring some things out and then maybe being transparent and sharing that where it's appropriate. Can help your members figure stuff out. Like, I do think there's a component of this too for organizations that may be in a position to help guide their membership around not just adopting the AI that they as an organization use for supporting members, but also the component of, oh, you as a, like, you have thought leaders, or most associations have thought leaders who will be thinking about this and putting those thought leaders out there so that your members can learn too. I feel like is part of the, and maybe change management wouldn't put it this way, but for me, it feels like that's like the change management of the industry. There's the individual person making their choices. There's the organization making choices. And then there's like, what is your industry? That's one of the beauties of community to me too, is that maybe while this is all happening, you're also having these conversations in your online community between your organization and between members of what do we want this to look like? I think for me, if AI is here to stay, then how do we decide how it's here to stay? How do we be part of deciding what that looks like as opposed to just letting it carry us off? Let us be part of deciding, well, I do want it involved in this and I really don't want it involved in this.
Absolutely. And I think part of that too, we talked a little bit about like, documentation, and where governance comes in. This could be an excellent opportunity for what I would like to call like the AI, quote unquote, like the business case. Like, what does it look like? Right now, because again, AI is evolving. Please know that the business case for your organization could look one way in a month, and then a couple months down the line, you may need to refine it. But as you're talking, Kelly, like I'm thinking through like, if associations or organizations have taken a moment to think like, maybe this is like a micro volunteer opportunity, like for like our members, right? Because I'm thinking about, best practices from online community engagement, like who are really the ambassadors or the stewards like of like their online community. I would imagine in association membership that there's going to be some people that are just going to be like super passionate about AI. They're using it for like, most things. They're talking it up. They're excited about it. So this might be that opportunity to be like, well, and again, this is going to depend on individual organizational staff capacity. I certainly don't want to assign people more work, but just kind of like thinking through like, maybe again, we have like this task force where we're recruiting, members that are interested in AI, that are using it, that are like excited about it, that help us craft like, what does the business case look like as part of a strategic priority for membership or marketing or what have you. But really leveraging the people assets, I think are going to be like really important. Again, with the caveat that because AI is evolving so much, like it's going to be that process of continuous learning, because you may need to refine it a few different times or keep refining it as the path of AI just continues to shift and evolve in the industry or just in the world.
Yeah, that reminds me of this one shift in work that I was thinking about recently, because we talked about it in a team leader meeting about there may be a shift from some of the tasks that people do now to a shift of like managing some of the systems that we build. Like, for example, I was thinking about how if I build anything to help me with social media, for example, social media is changing constantly. So I'm going to be needing to check in with the system I build regularly and update like, okay, what works? Like I just noticed LinkedIn changed the way that carousels show up, and they I'm noticing a new thing where some of the videos are showing in like a little call out box, which to me signals maybe we're going to see a shift from carousels being really popular to seeing maybe video get a little more popular. I don't know that yet, but that reminds me of the ways that I, as a content marketer, have always wanted to be a little more on top of trends. And sometimes I don't have time to be. And then if I do have certain systems set up with AI to do some of the more manual work or some of the more tedious, time consuming work, now I do have time to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm noticing this change. Maybe that means I need to tweak whatever my system is for drafting things so that it incorporates this trend that I'm seeing.
As the technology continues to like evolve and change, the way that we do our jobs are also going to continue to like evolve and change. So getting like just noticing, again, being curious, I think is going to be really important.
Wrapping things up, I wonder if looking ahead, is there anything you hope associations get right about AI adoption over the next few years?
When I think through what the definition of done or right is, it's going to look different at like every organization. And I know that that may seem like, well, actually, that's not really like an answer, but it is though, like if you really think about it. So what I'm thinking through about, broadly, what I hope associations, quote unquote, get right, it's really about how the association is impacted positively by AI. Did it improve a process? Did it, make a difference from like the member perspective? And as long as we can quantify that by either like customer testimonials or like sentiment, I think that that's what I'm talking about, like getting it right, if you will, because it's really going to be dependent on your industry and like what your members' perception is.
I actually love that answer because I feel like,
okay, great.
Again, I know it can feel like one of those it depends type answer that we always hear in the association space, but it does depend, and it depends on your goals. And I think that's where, as an organization, you go back to, well, what are your goals? What are the things that your members really care about? And how can you serve them better? How does this help you serve them better? How does it help you meet your mission better? And what are the things that it can do to help you do that, so that you don't get just caught up in like shiny object syndrome where you're just like doing it just to do it. Like, I think maybe one of the questions to ask yourself is like, why are we adopting AI? What do we hope our organization looks like in 5 years, 10 years, a year, honestly, because of how fast things,
6 months,
how fast things are moving. Like what is your why? Like, what is the why of why you're doing it? And then start from that, as opposed to just, oh, I saw someone else. Not to say that you can't look at other people for examples and ideas and brainstorming, but make sure you apply it to what your organization is trying to do. And I think that's how you keep it human too, and how you keep it like really tied to the members, is by remembering who you are. I'm having a very, now I'm dating myself for recalling back to like Lion King.
Lion King. No, I love it. But you're absolutely right. So like when we're talking about like the positioning, like with AI, like related to your organization, getting an understanding of like, what are your mission, vision, values as an organization? What do you want to use AI to like accomplish? And then just kind of putting a plan together. I think like some low hanging fruit for that too, Kelly, like we're talking about, like, we talked about the business case, but even just having like an ethical or a statement around like AI, like we as an organization leverage AI for this, but also like making sure that it is relevant to your industry and to your members and doesn't like undercut like the mission of like what your organization really stands for and really is. So I think those foundational components are going to be great to revisit if you're starting with AI, or even if you're just restarting or revamping, but just getting what is the mission, vision, values, who is this for, and how can we, drive forward.
I am so appreciative of you coming on the show today, Ashleigh. I think this was a conversation I've been hungry for the AI conversation, because I do think there's so many great conversations about, it can do amazing things. And for me as a process person, sometimes I really want to get into like the how do we do this in a sustainable way? How do we make sure that it actually achieves what we're trying to? So I'm so happy you came on today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This has been invaluable and I'm so excited. And for you guys, the listeners, thanks for spending some time to hear what we got to say. And, looking forward to hearing all of the great things that your organizations are doing when it comes to AI and cultural adoption.
Thanks for joining us on the Member Engagement Show. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and check out past guests and resources at higherlogic.com/engagement show. I'm Kelly Whalen, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Member Engagement Show.